Hi, everyone. Big crowd in here. Thanks for coming out. I know there were some lines out there, but really excited for our session today and really appreciate everyone being here this morning. My name is Michelle. I am the founder of Clever Carbon, as well as the co-founder of Women in Climate. And I come from the private sector. No fishes on people's faces. I come from the private sector. I was a former Salesforce employee, still a very proud alumni. And I also work for a company called DocuSign. And so I personally have experienced how corporations can inspire employees to do more with their time and to give back, whether it's VTO, volunteer time off, other initiatives. Like at Salesforce, you could, for example, help a nonprofit set up their Salesforce instances, and a lot of our colleagues really enjoyed that. And today, as the leader of two nonprofits,
The second panel was up.
Leia's name's not on there. If you it'll be in there somewhere. Maybe click around, you'll find it. But the power of the corporates is really strong, and I think there are a lot of initiatives right now from an ESG standpoint on how can we decarbonize. I'm seeing a lot on trees and forests and regenerative agriculture, and a lot of labels that help consumers figure out, this clothing company uses cotton that was grown organically. When can we see a label or a standard that shows us, this fabric was made without runoff into the ocean, right? The shipping standards were so that marine life, there were no collisions, it's slower shipping, respectful shipping, on and on and on. So many examples of how we can serve the ocean. So today, I'm really excited to explore with really, really incredible corporations, Standard Chartered, Salesforce, as well as Oceanic Global, having worked with a lot of corporates as well. And I'm excited for you to hear from the team what they're doing and what can be done. So I'm going to start off by asking all of our panelists to do a short intro, your role at the company, and a short overview on how your organization touches and supports the ocean today. We'll obviously dive in a little bit more later.
So hello everyone, my name is Marisa Drew and I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer for, little feedback. Okay, the Chief Sustainability Officer for Standard Chartered Bank. And for those of you who may not know my organization, we consider ourselves a connector bank, helping to connect capital cross-border. We are in 52 footprint markets with a very heavy emphasis on the developing world, so Asia, Africa, and the Middle East are markets where we have been both in middle-income, high-growth economies, but also very much frontier markets. And in most of these markets, we've been there for 150 years, so we're considered a very local bank. So we have a deep connection to our cities, communities, and countries. And in many times, I'll go travel to a market, and someone will grab me and say, you put my father through college, or you helped build my family business. So that creates, I think, a sense of stewardship and very much a responsibility as an organization to think about how we can do things in a considered way. So very specifically as it relates to the ocean, I consider myself a bit of a water baby. So I get peace, I get joy, I get centered when I'm around the water. And so I bring that very fortunately into my day job. So at Standard Chartered, when I joined the bank as the inaugural CSO, I took a look, and this was carrying over from my former organization, where I had asked my team, because I always think with the lens of capital and how do we bring money to a certain situation. And there's a statistic that gets thrown around a lot, and I'm quite proud. I'm pretty sure it was my team that figured this out, because I sent them on a mission to map the UN Sustainable Development Goals with a specific question about where was money flowing and where was it not. And when they came back, having done that work, and found that UN Development Goal 14 was one of the least invested from a private capital point of view, it was a shock. Now, this was almost 10 years ago. It was a shock. How can that be when the ocean is so critical to human health and planetary health and all the things that we know, which is why we're here? And that set me on a mission to figure out how could a bank participate in this. The obvious place is to raise capital, but there's so many other ways banks can participate. So we can help to influence standard setting. So what does good practice look like? What are the things that we expect and encourage from our clients? Because we got a lot of power with a balance sheet. We can nudge good behavior by saying, if you act as a better ocean steward by doing certain things, we're biased to lend to you. The inverse is true too. What are the things, what I call red lines, which we will not do? You know, we very publicly say we will, and we're in economies that are very dependent on fishing, but we will not finance harmful fishing practices like bottom trawling. And those are big, bold statements, but if those industries are starved of capital, they also have a very hard time surviving. So those are just a few touch points. And then finally, just in the space of capital and oceans, we need a lot of innovative thinking. We need innovation, new systems thinking, because the way we've been doing it for a while hasn't worked. And we need to give ourselves the space to really do deep dives, pilot and test trial things. So I created an innovation hub in my organization that we call the Nature Hub, led by with the blue economy, given how critical it is and how underinvested it is and how understood or misunderstood the ocean is. And so in that hub, we've done things like just produce simple research. And I just want to pick up finally on the point you made about employees. We have 85,000 people in our company, and we pay for everybody in the company to have 3 volunteering days of their choice to put their wonderful talents and energies to work. That's just one thing that we can do to ignite 85,000 people. But often they say, I want to put my energy to something, help me figure out the best place to put it. And through our insights and our research, we can say, you know, this is going to be high impact. So why don't you go grab a team and go do something here or there? And we're more and more giving them opportunities to really, you know, as they say, get their hands wet into the ocean for the benefit of, obviously, its health and for conservation, et cetera.
Marisa, thank you for the important work that you're doing and leading the charge when it comes to the ocean. I've been watching Standard Chartered and you specifically, and you're a leader in this space. Thank you. Tim, let's see if that mic is okay, and we'd love to learn about Salesforce.
Testing. Sounds good. Yeah. Thank you, Michelle. So Salesforce is a global technology company. We're a leader in customer relationship management and trusted AI. I think there's a couple of things we can do for the ocean. One is related to our product and the other to our investments. There are about 60,000 NGOs that run on Salesforce, partly because the first 10 licenses, we make them free for NGOs, but also because I think we're the only software company that has a bespoke solution tool for NGOs. So if we could free 10, 20, 30% of the time of everybody who works for the oceans in these thousands of NGOs, I think that's a good contribution. And we're doing that, for example, by solving for making donor reports or sending funding applications with the help of AI. And yesterday we launched a new AI agentic tool with the Ocean Risk Resilience Action Alliance. It's quite a mouthful. Aura, for their octopus desk. So they will scan the entire ocean for investable projects, all the mangroves and coastal areas as well, and then make matches with interested funders like Standard Chartered, so they can immediately screen which projects are of investment interest, and that will then be taken up by an AI agent to do the first level of due diligence and check the project viability. So by doing that for these NGOs, we can hopefully help them to become more efficient. We also have a lot of investments in the nature space because we are striving to contribute to a net zero and nature positive world. We launched a nature positive strategy in 2023, in which we committed to help conserve, restore, and grow 100 million trees as our contribution to the Trillion Trees initiative. We're at about 56 million trees now, and 20 million of those are mangroves. Mangroves, as you know, are sort of the superheroes amongst ecosystems altogether, and they also tie the terrestrial and the marine world together. Essential for about 1/3, I think, of all global commercially fished fish stocks that hatch in mangroves. And we, in addition to that, have a commitment to purchase 1 million tons of high-quality blue carbon. So we made that commitment in October 2021, and I just reread the press release, and at the time we thought, as part of our compensation efforts, after reducing our emission as far as we can, we compensate for all our what is called scope 1, 2, 3 emissions. We thought we could go out there and buy 1 million tons of blue carbon of high quality and beautiful mangrove restoration projects or seagrass restoration or kelp. But we found nothing really. There was not a market for this. It didn't exist and the few projects that existed had quality issues. They were high priced. So we had to take a few steps back and first help develop that market. So with Aura and others, we developed high quality blue carbon principles and guidance, what high quality is. We helped to, with our market commitment, increase the availability of blue carbon projects. And we also co-launched and were the first investor in the Global Mangrove Breakthrough. So this is now bringing together over 100 companies and countries and investors to all together restore 15 million hectares of mangroves. So after doing all these things, we're now looking again at the market and seeing what we can do. But it's not an easy area to invest in. So I have a lot of respect for everybody who's a project developer in blue carbon or in the oceans in general. We try to do what we can with our investments and with our partnerships and with our software to help that entire market grow, but we definitely need a lot more companies. I was actually on another panel with Standard Chartered this week with Oliver, your colleague. So it can't always be the same companies sitting here. We have to have more companies, and it has to be, for them, the risk of doing nothing has to seem greater than the risk of doing something, because you can make mistakes, as we all know. And at the moment, thousands of companies are hanging back because the perceived risk-reward ratio is higher when you do something than when you do nothing. And that has to change. That has to flip. So bring companies you know or you speak to or you buy from or you invest in along on this journey and encourage them to invest in nature.
Well, I'm still learning about all the different nature initiatives with Salesforce, and I continue to be a very proud Salesforce alumni. Thank you for the work that you're doing, Tim, as well. Next, we have Leah.
Thank you. And I love the Aura as a blue thread running through each of us. My name is Leah Doyle. I'm the founder of Oceanic Global. And Oceanic Global's mission is really to reconnect people back to the ocean as the lifeblood of the planet. So you asked why oceans. For us, it's really, this is the starting point of all of our program areas and where we design from. And then how do we come back into balance? So we look at meeting people at different levels of stakeholder engagement. So at a grassroots level, we do a lot of ocean literacy work, community grants, and activating hubs around the world. At a business level, which we'll be talking a little bit more about today, we have a Blue Standard program. So we really developed a B2B verification program to help businesses shift their operating practices, really focus more on hospitality and tourism. And really proud that the program has now grown into 55 countries with over 500 businesses around the world. And then at an institutional level, for the last 7 years, we've partnered with the UN and produced World Oceans Day, which Marisa has spoken at in the past, and we had the privilege of celebrating on Sunday. And I can share a little bit more after. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm curious, are there any startups in the room? Anyone working for a startup? No, maybe some NGOs? Well, after this panel, we're also going to have a startup-focused panel as well with some incredible blue economy startups that have been working with Fortune 500, so make sure to stay for that. So let's dive in. Marisa, you gave us a really robust overview of how a bank, and specifically Standard Chartered, has been approaching your work in the ocean. Can you tell us why the ocean is a priority at Standard Chartered? And can you give us a deeper dive into a few of the initiatives that have been the most impactful?
So why is it important to us? Because 90% of our footprint markets depend on the oceans for a primary part of their GDP. So our economies cannot flourish and cannot develop unless we have healthy oceans. So it starts with our client base and who we serve. That's one lens to look at it. from. The other one is from that risk of loss, which is exactly what Tim talked about, this inaction point. If we think about how much coastal communities are at risk if we don't repair and preserve our oceans, their livelihoods, it's not even just about prospering and thriving and developing, it's actually about maintaining. And you can look at it whichever way you want. The fishing industry overfished, fish are not surviving well. You can look at it with storm activity on coastal communities, all of those things. And banks are largely, in some respects, in the risk game. So if I'm going to put my capital out, I need to know that capital can get repaid. But if I'm putting my capital out to companies and businesses that aren't going to survive, that is a bad economic equation from just the pure math point of view. So these are what I would call obvious reasons why we get involved. But I think the slightly more happier version is it is such an emotional subject for certainly me. But when you're able to articulate this and when you're able to expose people, as you do so very beautifully, to the ocean, there is an emotional connection that I think people feel, and then that drives a lot of what I would say the passion. And I always say if you can harness the passion in any company, you're going to deliver results. So that's a little bit of the why. The how and where it's working for us, I get excited when we're able to prove people wrong. There's a little rebel side of me that always says, when you tell me I can't do something, I'm like, bring it on, and I'm going to go figure it out. And so early on, people were telling me oceans were uninvestable from an institutional or a big capital point of view. And it just bothered me. I'm like, I just cannot sit with that and believe that that's not true. I think there's a misunderstanding about the opportunity set, or I think that we're not structuring for what people need. And that's what we're in the business of doing in many cases, is structuring. Also in the information business, we have all these incredible platforms through our research department, oftentimes to do things like debunk myths. So much information these days is out there. This is where I hope your agentic agents are going to navigate this for us. But we need to, get the appropriate information out so people actually are informed about what they're doing. But those two areas, I think we've had success. So, for instance, one of our research reports is called "Where There's a Will, There's a Wave." And it's got a cute, snappy name, but we put forward 70 investment cases for no matter who you are or what industry you're in or how you want to participate that you could get involved in with your capital. Then we tried to map the types of companies in their life cycle against where capital should flow. So if you're early stage, if you're growth, if you're moving into institutional, who might be the stakeholders you should engage with? Because a lot of this matchmaking exercise is missing in our ocean space. So I feel very proud of that. And then there are specific transactions. We are in the process right now, and it's not one of those I would call sexy industries, but the amount of development in the ocean space, the marine space that's going on, the development of ports in my markets as they develop, having marine infrastructure to receive marine traffic is a huge deal in Southeast Asia, in the Middle East. We have great influence because we're underwriting these billion-dollar projects to say, if you do it this way. Make sure you manage your effluent. What is your port powered on? How about not dirty diesel? How about what are you doing about when you're building the port? Let's make sure that it is green concrete. And oh, by the way, what if you put coral and build mangrove fields around that burial coastal infrastructure that will make it infinitely more resilient, that'll feed the ecosystem, that won't degrade over time and create pollution in the ocean, and on and on and on it goes. But that's the kind of influence that we have to say, if you want our check, these are the things we'd like you to do, and I'm very proud of that. And we're seeing a response. Because the good news is, I think in my markets, the realization is there about how fragile the oceans are, and they want to do better. Oftentimes they just don't know how, and they need industry and global best practice to provide that influence. And last but not least, I'll touch on, and I do feel like a broken record, but because it's day 3 of UNOC, and I think I've used this case so many times, but it's a special one for me. We were the architects of a novel type of financing structure called a debt for nature swap. And for those of you who aren't familiar with what that is, we have so many island nations around the world that are struggling with their debt. They are unable to pay, partly COVID, but there are a lot of other factors at work. And they are, in many cases, almost in distress, not able to meet their debt payments. So we came up with this idea that what if, the big what if question, think big, if we could go to those countries and say, we're prepared to refinance your debt and make it more affordable, push out your maturities, bring your interest costs down under one condition. that we take a portion of the proceeds of that refinancing and we stick it in a ring-fenced, non-touchable box, if you will, in an endowment, that the money will be dispersed by an NGO, because at banks we're not experts on the ground about where the money should go with highest impact for the marine economy, but solely there to provide for marine economy. And the idea behind that is, if we create that pool of capital to reinvest back in the ocean health of these island nations, what's it going to do? It's going to feed their economies, because they're dependent on fishing and tourism and clean beaches and not putting bad stuff into the ocean. So that pool of capital, though, in a normal fiscal budget of a stressed country, would never be available. There'll be 5,000 other priorities before conservation would be on their list. But we've created that bucket for it to exist and be administered by people who really know what they're doing to create those great outcomes. And I'm deeply proud of that, because our first experimental one of those was $15 million in size, done in 2018. And now we're doing them at a couple hundred million or $1 billion at a time. So the amount of capital that we're unlocking for marine restoration and conservation is in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And that's a really big deal, because 10 years ago when people said oceans are uninvestable, literally there was nothing. And they were saying maybe 5 million, 10 million, and we're doing 500 million and $1 billion. So that's a happy day for the ocean economy, and a proud one for me.
Round of applause. I mean, you know, you had been telling me about this debt for nature swap in the Bahamas, and I was like, what is a debt for nature swap? So I'm so glad.
Sorry, I don't need to give you a finance 101 class at this hour of the day, but hopefully it brought it down to
Yeah, I'm like, can you explain it to me like I'm 3 years old? And that was perfect. And I hope that more countries are able to take advantage of this financing tool. I will also say that the reports that Standard Chartered put out are very helpful. When we ran into each other in Baku, you were very excited because kelp is on the way. A report on the kelp industry was just being released, and it is so organized. There's a lot of data, and one that is in general about the blue economy that you mentioned. What was the name of that one again?
So where there's a will, there's a wave. And by the way, I'm very happy to share, if you want to write down and you want to have access to any of our content, we put a very special place on our website. So SC, so Standard Chartered, sc.com/ocean. Super easy. But all these reports are there. So kelp is on the way. And so the latest one that we just dropped right before UNOC, another snappy title, the ROA of an MPA. So marine protected area, because a lot of people don't understand, like, how do these things actually work, and we want to sort of share that knowledge. So yes.
The last thing I wanted to note is that you really have a knack for fun names, Marisa. As we were determining the title of our session today, Marisa was like, I want Seize the Day, and it is very on brand. So thank you for sharing all of that, Marisa. Next, I'm going to move on to Tim. So, Salesforce is a tech company, yet there is a nature biodiversity team focused on climate action. You've highlighted some of the ocean work, but I would love to learn a little bit more about the genesis of the ocean team and some of the work just roadmap-wise on what's going to happen for the ocean.
So I already mentioned our Agent Force use case for Aura, and like that for the about 60,000 NGOs that are our customers. There's a lot I think we can do for all of them. Many of them work on nature and for climate. And when we then mapped out who of our customers rely on nature, not surprisingly, of course, for almost half of our customers, nature is absolutely essential. For many more of them, it is material, as it is for Salesforce. And we have, in what we can do, of course, a number of things that we can structure in helping all our customers and all our partners navigate this. When we launched our nature positive strategy, we piloted what is called the TNFD, the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. And that helped a lot of our customers navigate that space, which is complicated, as Marisa knows. And a lot of our customers are under obligations to report to, for example, what is called the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive in the EU, which is sort of extended a little bit now in time, but is still coming. So we also have this program to help all of our customers get ready for this. Because without the success of our customers, customer success is our number 2 core value after trust. And without our customer success, we can't thrive as a business. In fact, the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, which is the IPCC equivalent for nature, has just estimated that the world is already $25 trillion poorer, if you want. We are losing $25 trillion per year because of biodiversity loss. That means all of us who work in business or for business could do a lot better if nature was restored or conserved at the level that we need it. And we have forgotten about that. So that absolute dependence on nature is something that we try to internally help our customers navigate. Now, I mean, ocean team sounds very grand. We actually have one person who focuses on the ocean, but we obviously work with a lot of partners and a lot of our customers who have larger nature investments. We have alliances like Symbiosis. So last year, together with Meta, Microsoft, and Google, we launched the Symbiosis Coalition, and we made a 20 million ton purchase commitment for high-quality nature-based removals. In that, we first now ran an RFP for terrestrial removals, and we will run one for mangroves. So that market signal value that we give to the voluntary carbon market spurs all these ecopreneur innovations that we see. There's over 1,500 new companies and startups that are focusing on carbon, and I have huge respect for anybody working in this space because it's a very volatile market. So by sending these market signals from the big tech companies, and by the way, we're open for other companies to join the Symbiosis Coalition, we can help to create that market because we need carbon markets as one tool in our toolbox to solve the climate and nature crisis. That's very clear. It's not a silver bullet, but it's basically a tool that ensures that investments and capital flows to where the best and most cost-effective solutions can be found. That is what markets do, nothing else. So it has to be a tool, and we need the voluntary carbon market. So in that, we hope to continue to guide that journey towards success for us and success for our tens of thousands of big customers.
So the beautiful thing about a panel like this is how symbiotic our two organizations are, because my chief executive was one of the early architects of the voluntary carbon markets when it was just a little kernel of an idea and a task force with the person who is now the Prime Minister of Canada, the great Mark Carney. They were kicking around this idea, how systemically could we put a price on effectively either carbon, and then that's evolved into put a price on nature. Because if we can price in the bad things we're doing, or the inverse, price in the value of these gorgeous stocks of natural capital, then we can start redirecting financial flows to where it matters and where we shouldn't be operating, whichever side of the coin you want to look at. So then we created something called the Singapore CIX, the Carbon Exchange. So we trade carbons, we provide liquidity for the market. So when you want to buy, we can actually help source it and trade it if you want to kind of come in and out of it. But also by creating liquidity, we can get a good price on it. And then we sit on the Integrity Council of the voluntary carbon markets in order to try to make sure, when you were saying those projects, they may not be, you need to make sure that they work and that they do what they say they're going to do, because that gives confidence to the market to have the market scale. So that's a little piece of what we do to give you the ability to make those gigantic purchases, and that's where the symbiosis comes in so very nicely with corporates like ourselves.
Thank you. I like that synergy here. And, Tim, you mentioned at Salesforce there's only one person on the ocean, but that's more than most organizations. Even those with environmental assessment teams, there's not always someone specifically dedicated. And for a tech company to have one person on the ocean, it's a signal as well. Yeah. So Leah, Oceanic Global partners with corporations to help reduce their impact on the ocean. Can you share some of the corporates that you work with, the nature of the partnerships, and a little bit more detail on the Blue Standard?
So in terms of corporates, typically when we work with a big corporation, it will either be through the Blue Standard program or through Oceanic Global as a whole, and we will always weave in the Blue Standard program. So for example, one of our long-standing partners has been Corona Anheuser-Busch, and when we started working with them, they wanted to do a public-facing campaign, and the only way we agreed was if they were going to make sure that all of their activations were also Blue verified. So we're really proud that over the last 3 years, that means that they've actually made shifts within their supply chain, but also how they're showing up globally within the different markets and working within the different field teams on the ground, as well as global activations like the Olympics in Paris, which they were the main sponsor of last year. We also, so through Blue, which Michelle actually is one of our advisors on, so it's another beautiful full circle here, have really been able to kind of meet businesses where they're at. When we designed Blue, we found that there was so many solutions that are available that actually businesses just needed their consulting assistance through. And so we designed it in a way where we were training local nonprofits and local consultants with the tools to be able to work with businesses within those regions to do it. We feel like it's really important to be able to do that knowledge sharing component, which is why as a small team, we've actually been able to bridge out so globally there. And although a lot of our work is focused on plastics, it's been really beautiful to also see how that's progressed over the last few years to be able to address things like waste management infrastructure, water usage, really kind of looking at how do we link oceans into all these other sustainability components. And I think that's what I've seen as this people who typically don't see themselves as part of the ocean space, and they say, no, I'm in hospitality, or no, I'm in tourism, is starting to understand these interconnected points. And that's also how we're talking about these issues. So for example, from plastics, we don't just talk about the environmental component, but also the human health component. And as we have some of the corporates on the panel too, one of the things that we've seen as an entryway actually has been working with office spaces. So we started working with Salesforce office space in New York a few years ago, and this was brought in by actually a lot of the volunteers that decided to host a lunch and learn. And it's been really beautiful to see naturally how that's been taken in at a leadership level, and we see that constantly with businesses in the entryway. So yeah, just to kind of give a full picture.
I mean, Corona is only one of many big brands that you work with, but it's nice to see companies, leaning in. And I think the framework is so important because if companies were to invent this from scratch, it would take a lot of time and resources, but when there is a standard and a framework already there, it makes it easy, especially when other large organizations have already subscribed. And whether it's women in climate events that I organize or the Carbon Newbie Summit, we always verify with the Blue Standard as well. Obviously have to support, but it's helpful.
Yeah, I think what we've seen in the space, and you mentioned standards in a very different way, is specifically with plastics, it's moved so quickly. And there's a lot of different options that have come to the table, so there's a lot of confusion too, and it's been deliberately designed to create confusion by the plastic industry and by the recycling industry. So we see a lot of businesses that have the right intentions and will move to bioplastics, for example, but they don't have the infrastructure within these countries to properly be able to break it down. And this is where I think having verification bodies and really having hands-on consulting support is really essential to make sure that the right purchasing decisions are being made, because we've also seen a lot of businesses that have the right intentions, that are really excited, and will go and choose something that looks really sexy, and then they realize they're creating just as much harm, and then they don't want to be part of the environmental space. And that is also a really heartbreaking component. So I think there's a lot of integrity that's needed in the space, and huge amounts of knowledge sharing. We work constantly with scientific advisors to be able to break down what makes sense at a localized region level too, and then also linking businesses with sustainable solutions on the ground, because these are coming out constantly.
Maybe a little secret goal that I have that is not going to be secret anymore is for a standard like the Blue Standard to either partner with an existing consumer framework to have ocean-friendly check marks, or to have your own. Yeah. we'll
Maybe I like the manifestation going on.
Exactly. Okay, so you can do a lot for the ocean, but obviously, metrics can be helpful, but they're also challenging. So at your organization, what metrics do you use to measure impact? What are some challenges related to this area? If there's anyone that wants to jump in.
So there's been a lot of development in this space, and I see Kat Brucey is in the audience from Nature Metrics. So measuring biodiversity has become so much easier in the last 5 years and is now accelerating at a rapid pace. So the cost of monitoring and measuring biodiversity and other key indicators for sustainability has come down dramatically. And again, technology is of course a tool that can help with that. And we are, for example, now working with the Forest Stewardship Council to simplify all of their global guidance. It's a very confusing plethora of different guidance that you have if you want to, this is on land, but if you want to certify a forest, and obviously we can do the same for the Marine Stewardship Council at some point, it is very complicated to find out where and how to invest, what guidance applies to you, what language you can access it in. So all of that can be simplified now with the help of AI. So we hope that that kind of the certification, but also the measurement, the monitoring can be improved rapidly through technology in the next few months and years.
Maybe I could add that metrics are absolutely critically important because you want to know what your impact is that you're delivering, and that is a fundamental prerequisite for finance to flow. But it's interesting because, in this nature space, complex ecosystems are by definition ecosystems. That means that one thing over here might create something over here that we don't fully always understand. And so it's incredibly important that we begin to get this right and we challenge ourselves. And I do think AI is going to be a big help just crunching the numbers, the data to understand what those outputs look like. But equally, we need to make it really simple for the user groups. So what I mean by that is, back to my point, we operate in many, many frontier markets. And as a lender, I want to encourage best practice. And I'll go to our companies in a frontier market and say, first, I need your carbon emissions data because I've committed to net zero, and I need to know that the companies I'm banking are with me on that program. And some of my markets, just getting that emissions data has been an absolute exercise in frustration. And then imagine I come to them and say, oh, by the way, thanks for the carbon data. I need your biodiversity data. You can see their heads might start exploding. So we've got, and then the early days of some of these metrics folks, they thought the more metrics that we have that we could throw at people, all the better. And we got to a point where there were 800 metrics, woo, that we all have to report on. Now, can you imagine how a corporation, particularly a small or medium enterprise, absorbs that? We can't throw that on them. So we've got to, in a way, use this data to figure out in metrics what matters, what is proportional, what's affordable, and what's actually practical, and then on the other end, what isn't going to, that do no harm principle. And that's a super complex space, and that's why we need, people who really considered people to be on this, whether it's the cats of the world or those who actually pull all this information together. But, we're all incented to try to figure it out, but that's my only worry here is, A, we got to move fast to kind of make sure that we get on it, but B, let's make it easy for the user groups.
So true.
Would you? I think when we talk about impact metrics, we're looking at it a little bit differently, and a lot of the time we actually have to have sign off either from the leadership team, so this is coming at a board level, or it's an ESG, for example, framework that they're looking for specific ones to come into. And so there we're looking at how do we quantify that, and we have that already developed within Blue. But what we also find is a lot of the marketing teams of the big corporations that we work with are also looking for very different impact metrics. And we're having to also translate those. And that's a really interesting nuance. But when I look at the work that I personally think is the most impactful, it's the ones that we traditionally don't quantify. It's really that ripple effect there that we see on the ground. So it may be a Blue School and a mangrove project that has, originally we were working with plastics and they've decided to take that on, and we're thinking and designing outside of the box on how to bring in the local businesses and local communities. through Blue, we've helped impact 11 different policies, and that's something that came really organically by bringing different businesses within specific regions together. Again, that was never part of our impact metrics framework, but we just saw this as a missed opportunity if we didn't. So I also think that although we can get very stuck on the impact metrics, it shouldn't be the end framework.
Yeah, they can be really helpful, they can be really painful, but we need to move fast, right? Yeah. I want to go to my last question here. I'm curious, how do you convince senior leadership that the ocean is something that they should prioritize, that the company should prioritize? What is it like engaging, the C-suite or even board members on these types of initiatives? Maybe Marisa, we'll start with you.
I think both of us are fortunate that we work for organizations where top leadership is already bought in, and that makes our jobs particularly easy, because I have worked at an organization where I had the title of Chief Sustainability Officer, and I'm not so sure my CEO and senior leadership are all that convinced, and that was a hard slog. It's tough enough in our jobs, then you fight the tape of senior leadership. But to specifically answer your question, where I'm spending a lot of time is my board. Because my board, by definition, if you have a high-quality board, they're from very diverse backgrounds, and they aren't nature or ocean experts by any means. In fact, many of them are early on the journey. But what I try to always do is relate it to what is a board member's job. They have a fiduciary obligation to understand the strategy of the company, and they are there to provide advice and challenge. But they can only do that if they're coming from a place of information. So, and they really, their job to challenge, I think, is to always come back to, does this serve the strategy? And does the strategy serve your stakeholders? And if you get all those pieces right, then you're pretty much there. So that has to start with education. So I had a board training not that long ago on nature for my board. And they said to me, this is the first time anybody's actually sat us down as a board and taught us about nature. Where are nature risks in our organization, where are nature opportunities, etc. All the while I reminded them that one of our most important taglines at Standard Chartered is here for good. And it's here for good as in we want to do good, but here for good as in longevity, back to my point of 150 years in most of my markets. So for me to relate nature to the here for good equation was a very useful way of me linking this concept of why are we doing all this ocean stuff? Why do we allocate resources and people and money to this? It's because we're delivering on our corporate strategy and delivering on the here for good promise. And that's when I could see their eyes sort of light up and go, yeah, okay, I get it. And that was just a tactical tool in some ways, but it was also more an emotive tool too. If we get this right, what are we doing? We're saving our markets and our communities from risk, we're protecting our balance sheet, and we're finding those enormous investment opportunities that are going to create value for us, because I've got a favorite phrase that says value creation and often is born out of necessity, right? There is no other option. And if you go down that path of why it's necessary, you don't create an idea and look for a market. You're actually going where there's a gigantic market to participate in.
Tim.
So our CEO, Mark Benioff, was actually at the Ocean Conference and spoke in the first Ocean Action Panel. So like Marisa said, that is of course very powerful. I think what is also very powerful in big corporations is to have core values that express this affinity to sustainability. In our case, sustainability is a core value. It's trust, customer success, innovation, equality, and sustainability. And these are core values we can always come back to when push comes to shove, or when there's questions of where the company is positioned. And that also, as you said, galvanizes our employees. We have more than 10,000 staff who are engaged in what is called Earth Force. So this is our volunteer group that has a strong affinity to all things nature and climate action and sustainability. And I would say it's not so much about the ocean in particular, but about nature and our dependence on nature and all biomes and all ecosystems. I know at this conference we talk about the ocean specifically, but we all depend on nature for all our business. Nature is everyone's business, because with a failing nature and collapsing ecosystem, there is no business. There's no food, there's no water, there is no profit. So recognizing that and coming back to the core value of sustainability is important for the board, it's important for the leadership, it's important for our customers to see that, for our investors to see that. And we as the sustainability team, as the impact team in Salesforce, can of course pull the data that substantiates that point. We can pull the data to say how many of our largest customers are dependent on the ocean, are dependent on forests, are dependent on watersheds. We can pull the data to say how many of them will have to report on these things to the 1,200 data points in the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, for which we have a great tool, by the way, so Net Zero Cloud. But we can of course pull the data, but that core value of sustainability is very important for a large company.
Thank you, Tim. Leah, when you work with C-suites and executives, it's in a different role because you're more in a selling role. What has your experience been there?
Very diverse. So if we're working with a corporation, for example, like the One Hotel Group, where the founder really believes in it, and it's, you mentioned values, it's much easier because it means that all the different teams, all the different markets, it's embodied within the framework. They're looking at how to be activating around this. So for example, with the One Hotel Group, every year as part of their global convening, we actually do one day on the environment and we do a whole morning on oceans, and we'll bring in different subject matters around it. And this means that all the different properties around the world are starting to look at how they can start to have these conversations within these frameworks too. When it is brought in more at a team level, and we've worked with groups like Constellation Brands over the last few years, we struggle a huge amount if it's really one person pioneering this, because there's a huge amount of turnover a lot of the time in these large corporations. And then this, what typically starts off as a passion project, which people get really excited about, when it's passed on, it just doesn't have the same level of prioritization. And so I think what we've seen is we do really need to be able to go in and to make sure that we're doing a lot of capacity building within these much larger corporations so that they truly understand the importance. Nature, oceans, it's essentially all the same thing at the end of the day. It's our reliance on. And there's many, many different pathways here, depending on the structure and the nature of the business. So we spend a lot of time doing that capacity building just so that we're able to bridge these relationships and they understand the importance of it and they're invited into the space.
And I think also in a sales capacity, when you have the ability to reference, oh, well, Salesforce is doing this, or Standard Chart has led that, that will be easier and easier. So those customer cases are really useful. My goal is to really have more corporates be inspired to invest in nature, in biodiversity, of which the ocean plays a huge, important role. It has been really inspiring to hear from all three of our speakers today to see how they have been approaching this in three very different perspectives. I hope at UNOC 4 we have more on the panel as well, different corporations to prove the case. And yeah, thank you so much for your work and thank you for your time today.